I think that the work we do on a yoga mat is just a little microcosm of the work that we're meant to do in this life, and how we treat ourselves on the mat is how we treat ourselves off the mat, and usually how we treat everybody else in our life as well. So if we can treat ourselves really lovingly on the mat, push ourselves when we need to, but also know when to rest, then we are more likely to be able to do that in real life.
Welcome to the Beyond Listening podcast with Miriam and Adam from We Are Open Circle. We are really excited today because we've got an old friend, or a longtime friend, Pranidhi Varshney. She is the founder and a primary teacher. Are you the primary? Would you
Yeah,
consider
yeah,
the
I have a
primary teacher?
co-teacher now, but yeah, I guess you could call me the primary teacher.
So she's not just a businesswoman. She's also in the room every day teaching yoga at Yoga Shala West in Los Angeles. And she's got some really interesting things to say. And I've been overjoyed, Pranidhi, to see you coming out and sharing your perspective more and more,
Mm-hmm.
responding to the world. I'm sure you've been invited many times before, but it seems like you're saying yes more now to
Yeah.
sharing your particular view of yoga. But I'm thinking about yoga as kind of a center point for so many of the conversations that are happening in the world now, the meeting of cultures, your recent article about cultural appropriation in yoga, issues like power and hierarchy and educational power, and yeah, so much more that we're going to dive into.
Mm.
So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I love you both, and it's really an honor.
It's always an honor to sit with you and to hear you say that you appreciate sitting with us is just like a catalyst um, of appreciation and gratitude. Right?
Mm.
Um, so let's just start at the beginning. You're if I just introduced you as a yoga teacher,
Yes.
um, what does that mean to you? And also, what was the journey, the path that you took to finding yourself in that role?
Well, I'm kind of like if someone just looked at me on paper, I'm like a walking cliche of somebody who lives in LA, like a former actress who now teaches yoga, you know? But yeah, I had a previous life in which I was in entertainment, and then I found yoga sort of um, in the middle of that. And I often tell the story where that people think that because I'm Indian, I just popped out of the womb practicing yoga, and that we were just steeped in it, throughout my childhood, and that's not really true at all. At least yoga in the sense that we know it here in the West. Um, I didn't practice any asana really till I was in high school, I think, or an early college. And that's when I was first introduced to the practice. But once I was introduced to the practice, I really loved it. And I happened to find myself in an Ashtanga Yoga class, and I just really resonated with the practice. And then I didn't really look back after that. I just kept diving deeper and deeper. And at some point, I came to a fork in the road in which I had to, not had to, I felt that I was being called to make a choice in terms of whether I was going to continue um, pursuing the arts in the professional sense, or if I was going to really, throw my energy behind yoga practice and yoga teaching. And the choice actually wasn't very difficult. And so I chose yoga, and my shala here in Los Angeles, I started that in 2015. So it happened pretty quick. I think I got married in 2014, kind of made that choice. And then by 2015, the shala was open. So that's how I find myself here.
What's a shala for those
Oh yeah, a
that
shala
don't?
is just a Sanskrit word that means yoga school.
And what's
Yeah,
yoga?
that's a good question. What's yoga? Yoga to me is the practice of living within one's body so that we can live in the present with ourselves and with other people.
And so you help people do that in your shala.
I hope so. Yeah, that's what I intend to do.
What so since this is not a yoga podcast, although I we tend to we have a lot of friends in that world. So
Hmm.
um, what in terms of Ashtanga yoga and also the way that you teach, which I think I've definitely experienced and read you talk about being a more compassionate approach to
Mm.
teaching and learning Ashtanga yoga. How does what you do help people move into a deeper relationship with themselves in their bodies and with others? Like, what do you actually do in there?
So, I mean, really simply, what we actually do in there is offer a set of tools or a set of practices, starting as simply as with the breath. So, when a new student walks in, we sit down. The first thing these days, teaching is an evolution. So, I'll speak to just what I do in these days. And these days, when a new student walks in, I just have them sit, find a comfortable seat, whatever that means for them, and just spend the first few moments becoming aware of how they're breathing without trying to change it or manipulate it at all. And even just watching those few moments, I think I learn a lot about that person. Um, some people are not even able to really like focus on their breath. They're not able to bring the attention inward. And so I'm just during that process, I'm watching and observing and learning about the person. And then if I feel like, that's able to happen, actually, whether I do or not, the next instruction that I give is to deepen the breath, to deepen the breath. And, but your listeners may not know that in Ashtanga Yoga, we create a little bit of sound as we breathe. So I offer those instructions. Um, and then I watch how that process goes, how that breathing process is going. And then we'll stand up and I'll teach them a little bit of movement to go along with that breath. And then I will usually, after that, check in with the student, see how it's going for them, how they're feeling. And based on what they're saying, we decide together, okay, that's enough for today, or I want to learn a little bit more. And that's just how the process goes for a new student. And over many days, many weeks, many months, we build a practice that feels supportive to them and nourishing to them. And of course, if we have students who are coming in who are very established in the practice, then the teaching is much more nonverbal. It's mostly through my hands and through just the energetic field that happens when a bunch of people are practicing together. And I think there is something really special about practicing together. Even though we may not be doing the same thing at the same time, there's just a really powerful energy that happens. And I think I feel even more strongly about that now because we have all had this experience over the last 2.5 years of being pretty isolated. I was just saying we had the last 2.5 years of COVID where we all were really isolated and we did our best practicing over Zoom and all that. But I just felt as soon as we were allowed to be back in person, that we took that opportunity. And I'm just so grateful that the community is coming back strong now.
That sounds so simple, what you just described. But I know from experience that what happens, like in that simplicity of what you're describing, like that, okay, we have the breath, presence. How does that meet the world of the yoga room and the world of the people in the room? Like what happens? What do you notice that happens in that? In what seems so simple, take a few breaths, move a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I actually think it is pretty simple. I think like the complications are really our own. We have this method, that's it just provides some structure to what we're doing because I think structure is actually a really good thing. It gives things shape. It gives us a container in which to work and do our work. Um, but I think it's really important to realize that that's what it's for. It's not to be oppressive or rigid. Um, and I think what it also does, the sort of the structure we practice within, it gives everybody a chance to sort of buy into what we're doing, you know. So the way we practice at my shala is if a new student is brand new, I usually offer them a 2 week sort of trial period. And the trial period is actually a gift. I don't charge for that period because I really want to make sure that the student is wanting to be learning the practice and being with our community because they want to do that, not because they're trying to get the most out of that they can out of because they paid me some, you know, small amount of money or whatever for 2 weeks. So we offer that as a gift. And what happens is that usually a lot of people don't make it, or they make it the 2 weeks because they've you know sort of made this commitment, and then they don't come back. And I'm okay with that rate of attrition because I don't really want people there who don't want to be there. Um, and usually what happens then is the people that make it through the 2 weeks and then are in, they're really in. Like they understand what we're doing, they understand the vibe, and they're down with the vibe, and then they're happy to be there. And I think a lot of what happens in yoga practice also is like learning how to just be in the room with each other. I think a lot of us have forgotten what that's like over the past 2.5 years. Being in a room together with people that you actually don't know very well, but you maybe see every day or a few times a week. These sort of like semi-casual relationships, and yet at the same time they're quite intimate because we are doing this intimate practice together. We're breathing, we're moving, we're sweating, we're crying, we're falling, these things that we don't really do in front of other people. And so I think it is a beautiful opportunity to practice that, you know, being vulnerable and intimate, but not necessarily with your partner or your family.
One more question. You said our work. What do you mean by our work?
Our work, I think I just meant the work that we feel we're meant to do in this life. I think that the work we do on a yoga mat is just a little microcosm of the work that we're meant to do in this life, and how we treat ourselves on the mat is how we treat ourselves off the mat, and usually how we treat everybody else in our life as well. So if we can treat ourselves really lovingly on the mat, push ourselves when we need to, but also know when to rest, then we are more likely to be able to do that in real life.
I'm finding this conversation kind of curious because, Pranidhi, we have been on a shared journey of kind of unpacking what Ashtanga Yoga has meant to us and in a culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I always felt like you had a more vital and interconnected relationship with it than me. Not because you're
Mm-hmm.
Indian American, but just
Mm-hmm.
because of a level of dedication and devotion that I could only aspire to. Um,
Mm.
but there's so many things that we've talked about, but I never asked you, what does yoga mean to you? You know, like it's not like obvious questions. Or what do you think you're doing in that room? Like, you know, um, so it's kind of funny to ask those questions. Like,
Yeah,
I hope you don't feel like I'm asking just for the purposes of people that are listening. Um, Although it's probably going to be informative, but also like what, you know, it's fun. It's a fun opportunity just to
it
think.
is fun. Yeah, well, it's also fun to articulate it because I think a lot of us like do these things that we do that we've done for years, but we don't really think too hard about why we do them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Unless someone asks us, or
yeah,
like a student,
exactly.
you know, and the student response might be, yeah, I guess you probably meet them where they are. Like if someone comes in and they're showing one desire or interest, you want to give, I don't know if you have this experience, you want to give them a little bit of that, but then
Yeah,
also then expand from there, what the experience could
yeah,
be for them.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so let me see where we go from here. Um, I think what I was even just thinking about there was like shared culture. Like
Mm,
someone can walk into your for people that don't know, Ashtanga Yoga has a sort of a general structure. Ashtanga Yoga asana, anyways,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, has a sort of general structure and a general culture that like you can go. Presumably, you could go to one. You could be practicing at Yoga Shala West, and then you're on a trip to, I don't know, Dallas, Texas, and you can go into that an Ashtanga Yoga room and at least have a general understanding of
Mm-hmm.
what that is. Um, and it's very curious because it's, in my experience, it's going to show up so differently depending on the teacher, depending on the sort of geographical culture around it. Like Texas is probably going to have a little bit different vibe than West LA
Mm-hmm.
versus Mysore, India.
Yeah.
But then there's like people that come in and out of all these spaces and
Yeah.
share culture. Um, I'm curious what I have the feeling that you've thought about this, like
Mm-hmm.
the modern construction of culture in the Ashtanga Yoga room,
Mm-hmm.
like how we think about it, where it might have come from, how we think about where it came from. Um,
Yeah.
because it's a little bit of like a bizarre subculture. If someone's just hearing about this right now and the way that you've described it, they may not even have a familiar place like to even think about having that experience practice. You get what I'm
Yeah.
aiming
Yeah.
at?
Yeah. I think so. Um, so you want me to talk a little bit just about like, yeah, how the culture originated? I think culture is really fascinating, actually, just like in general as a topic. Um, I think my observation has been that people in the West are really starved for culture. And so what I've seen happen in the Ashtanga Yoga subculture is like a lot of Westerners went to India in the 70s or whatever and learned this practice, maybe even earlier. Um, and I think a lot of Westerners at that time were going to India because they were starved for culture. They were looking for meaning in their lives, spiritual meaning. But I think a lot of times when people are looking for spiritual meaning or a path, it's because they feel unmoored, and culture is something that moors us. Um, I don't. I think it's not an accident that people that come from cultures that are deeply rooted don't necessarily need to leave their cultures to go find themselves. Um, so what I see when I look at the history of Ashtanga Yoga is a lot of people who are looking to find themselves went to India, um, and found this. India is like it's overwhelming. The culture, you can't escape the culture. It just like soaks into your every pore. And I can imagine for somebody who has never had that experience, it's very seductive. And so you just go all in. You submerge yourself in that culture. And the yoga practice is part of that, even though Indians themselves don't practice that much yoga asana. But I think people who went to Mysore during that time were just totally immersed in the culture, immersed in the practice. And then they took that very specific experience and tried to bring it back to the West. And I think there can be a lot of things lost when you try to do that, or even you just can't really replicate a very specific experience. You can't really like just clone it and put it in a totally different society, which is I think what a lot of people tried to do. And I think in general, when you try to do that, that's when questions of cultural appropriation arise and all these things. Um, but yeah, I think my broader observation would just be that I think the thirst for culture is a lot of times what drives people to uh, like soak up cultures perhaps that aren't uh, their own, so to speak, or that they weren't born into. Uh, yeah.
And then how, thinking back onto the article you wrote about sort of the qualities of Western individualism and
Hmm.
East Indian. I don't even want to talk. I don't know if I can talk about Indian culture because I don't know it that well. But how it sort of gets, how these things. Like personally, I feel like there's actually a potential beauty in the mixing,
Oh, I do
like
too. Yeah, I do
mixing of
too.
the cultures. And what do you think is I guess, what have you seen? If you could talk a little bit about, like, if we took the cultural appropriation question out of it
Hmm.
for the moment, I think we'd come back to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
What do you think has been the potential of the relationship between the two as it's showing up in
Well,
modern yoga?
I think in what it kind of speaks to maybe something that we touched on earlier, that in the Mysore room we have this opportunity to practice being in a relationship with each other, you know, and I think that's what cultures, you know, that's what we have an opportunity to do with cultures, is like have these cultures be in relationship with each other, and so I feel like sometimes I'm in a sort of unique position to notice what's going on, and to just witness the synergies and also the places where things sort of fray apart or are in tension with each other, because I am dancing between two cultures. I am Indian, and yet I'm also very much American. And so I think the beauty is, like you said, is in the blending. It's in being able to see from one perspective, um, oh, you know, these are things that I never learned. These are things that are missing in my life. And then from another perspective, oh, these are the things actually that don't resonate very much with me. And so how can I bring in what really works from each culture, and then also bring it into the present moment? Because I think some of the danger is to try to apply things that worked 30 years ago, and make them work right now, or make something work, or try to make something work that worked in Mysore, India, for Indian people who were steeped in that culture, and try to make it work for Westerners, or vice versa. You know, try to make something work for Westerners who are coming from Europe, and then, you know, try to make that work in an Indian context. I don't think that gets talked about very often either. It's, you know, um, there's there's just a lot of complexity. It's not simple.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I think that the opportunity is to see the beauty in all of it and find the synergy that's going to work in this moment for the people that are in front of you right now. Because as a yoga teacher, I think that that's really what we're trying to do, is find something that works right now for that person where they are right now in their life.
Mm-hmm.
The word that keeps coming up is intersectionality, you know, like, and it was
Yeah.
interesting because I wrote it down when we first started talking. Like, I always view you as someone who, you know, in your talking about parenthood and motherhood and yoga, and in the meeting of the two cultures, like what happens at the intersection. And I can't help, because your yoga room is different for me. Because when I go
Mm-hmm.
in there, yes, I'm breathing and I'm doing the structure and the asana, but on the wall is the flower. Very boldly on the wall is the flower. And as I practice in your room, um, I'm I'm I contemplate more than in other rooms what's on that flower. And in fact, I often will choose it, and because it's written and it's very visual, which are, you know, for me, the values, the practice, the kind of the thing that's at the center of yoga as well. So I'm deliberately not naming it, but the flower is so, it has always, and maybe it's a different experience for different people, but even though you don't talk about it when you come in the room, it's very clearly there, and it says something to me to say, this is the flower, this is what we're doing here. That also is part of, for me, in the intersectionality of India meets, in the very transparent intersectionality in your room, which is like India meets West. We are in the West, and this is, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I am both. And there are different people here who have different experiences, and we're not denying that. Not everyone's the same, and we make space for that, you know. And then there's the flower. So I'm interested in
Yeah.
in
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
you know what? It's kind of like, yeah, the flower's there, and that's the context. It's so I feel like the flower. I've heard this from a lot of people actually, that they walk into the room and it is such a presence, that flower, that that it you can't help but have it impact you in some way. Usually when you're practicing in there, um, I think its steadfastness, is sort of, it's like a representative of me. I feel like, not like I am the flower, but it's like the sort of the steadfast presence, the context. You know, I am the leader of the space, and so I think everything that goes on there is sort of infused with that context. Um, and that's what I mean, like, when people really need to make a choice to be there, it's not the room for everybody, and I'm okay with that. And I
Just to
do have a
say,
little aside. Sorry,
oh no, you
I
go.
have a little aside about the flower. What's really funny is that we had it, we had it up for like 6 years or something, and then recently, several months ago, we had some water damage to the floor, and we had to get that whole wall redone. And so right now, actually, there is no flower, and there hasn't been a flower for several months. So
Well,
probably if
and
any of my newer students are listening, they're like, "What the fuck is a flower?"
what is
Because it's not
that? Well,
there.
just to say
But
that
it's coming
the
back. It's coming back.
the it's coming back. The flower also had some words, which I would say are the values. Um,
Yes,
and
values.
and so just for people who haven't been in your room, and those values, steadfast, like I would add steadfastness to those values, is that
Mm-hmm.
like what I was my perception of it. And I'm just wondering, like that was very central in your room, what those values are and what they mean to
Yeah,
you in terms.
to me, it's about integrity. All, those values, there are different ways of saying that we're going to behave with integrity toward ourselves and integrity towards the others in this room and the others in our lives. And for me, also, it's not about perfectionism. I think that, I mean, you both know, you're both parents. I think there's nothing like parenthood to really humble you and show you how imperfect you are. At least that's the journey that I've been on as a mother, is just wow, like how many times a day that I fail, or don't live up to my highest ideals of myself. Um, so it's not about perfectionism, but it's about having a sense of your inner compass, that inner compass that's going to guide you towards integrity. That's what those values mean to me.
I heard you say some really interesting things given I think the last time we were talking about yoga was in the context of our group, which was a response
Oh.
to Ashtanga Yoga as an sort of institution, or at least institutionalized culture in the West.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and us, I mean, I'm sure we both would say something very different about, like, to care if we had to care, since I'm being forced to characterize those years of conversations into like 2 lines. Yeah, a sort of, you might say something very different. But how do we navigate what feels like a disconnected hierarchical tradition and move it into more of a space where, like you were talking about, where you're just there for the students and there for the practice?
Yeah.
How would you describe that? What did we call ourselves? The Ashtanga. Can we say it now
The
that we're not doing it anymore?
I think we should.
The Ashtanga
The
Avengers?
Avengers, the
Yeah,
Avengers, yes, the
yeah,
Ashtanga Avengers. We won't name anybody in the group, so
yeah.
keep everybody under wraps. Keep their superhero capes on. But I think that how would I characterize those 2 years? I think those 2 years of conversations. So this is a group of teachers, basically, of sort of teachers who were existing underground, who were uh, not following the conventions of the mainstream Ashtanga Yoga culture. I think it was, honestly, I think it was a support group. I mean, that,
Yeah.
to put it simply, I think it was a support group. I think we all needed support because it's can be really tiring and uh yeah, tiring, exhausting. It just feels like climbing uphill to do something that's unconventional. I think I've done a lot of unconventional things in my life, so it feels like second nature, but that doesn't mean it's not hard. And I think so. I think teaching in that way that's unconventional, kind of butting up against the mainstream. I think a lot of us had wounds, and it was really helpful to have other people see those wounds, and perhaps they had those same ones as well. And it was a really healing process. for
Mhm.
us. And I think the question that you asked about how do we move in the direction of a more supportive, more compassionate teaching approach is kind of what you know, the reason you mentioned at the top that I'm being a little bit more vocal about things. And I think one of the reasons that I am is I think that we need to. I think that's the only way. I think there are a lot of folks who are actually just wanting to show up for people and create these communities where we can be together and practice together. But unfortunately, the people who are the loudest are the ones that are wanting something else. Often they're wanting power or status or fame or whatever. And that's not to say they're bad people, but I think that once you get a little taste of that, it's like getting a little hit and you want more and more and more. And so I think it's those of us who are wanting to teach in a different way, I think it's time for us to be vocal and to be put ourselves out there even when it's scary.
I would
And I
even
think that's
think,
the way forward. Yeah.
yeah, I would even say
Yeah.
like it might be that those other folks want or get a hit of power and fame, like micro fame, and
Yeah.
want more. But also, there's like this support network of the status quo.
Hmm. That's
It's like
true as well.
I used to feel that way. Like it would be so easy to just fall back into the status quo, like get the authorization. I mean, maybe it wouldn't be
Yeah, of
easy,
course.
but in the sense of like time and energy, but it would be so much easier to take somebody else's path.
Hmm.
And so that allows someone to be more vocal because it's like, oh, that's already approved language,
Right.
right?
Well,
And
I
that's
think that
where
speaks to, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
it kind of applies. I think that's where this conversation sort of like branches out to a lot of into other fields too,
Yes.
right? Maybe that's what you're about to say.
That's exactly what I was about to
Yeah.
say is I think that's what's happening in our culture, like across the board, is that it's our speech is becoming more and more policed.
Hmm.
It's like a kind of authoritarian vibe going on in all kinds of spaces. And I don't know any other way out of that than to resist. That's
Hmm.
sort of,
Oh
even
my
that's
gosh!
a
Did you
loaded
just say
word.
that? Our podcast is gonna get banned. But I think like to be clear about the resistance that you're talking
Yeah,
about.
I don't mean like hashtag resist.
Yeah.
That's not what I mean. I mean like to be bold and not in safe ways. I think weirdly I keep referencing the last 2.5 years. I'm noticing myself do that, but I think the last 2.5 years were really traumatic for a lot of people. We, yeah, of course, I wanted to take care of my fellow human beings and be responsible and all that. But I think there's a lot of authoritarian tendencies that came to light during these last 2.5 years. A lot of people were stuck at home and got crazy hooked to social media, and so I think it's really fried a lot of us these the COVID years. And so coming out of that feels uh, like it just feels like a lot. And I think uh, those of us who can speak up, say unpopular things, but do that in a way that's compassionate and loving and not antagonistic, I think that's really important.
Hmm. I When you talked about what's happening in your yoga room, I just heard I was hearing the word resistance. Like the dominant culture. I just imagine since I've been to your space so many times, like I can think about. I have this visual of like driving down like Sepulveda. Is it Sepulveda
Yeah,
Avenue?
yeah. Or
And like
sawtell. I don't know which word you take.
Sawtell, whatever. They're all like kind of in that. They all have the same
Yeah,
vibe.
yeah, yeah.
Like people
Yeah,
are
they do.
speeding around you. If you don't
Yeah.
hit the gas right when the light turns green, you're gonna get honked at. Like there's all kinds of chaos. There's the
Mhm.
full tragedy of this human life, like on this. Well, maybe not the full tragedy, but a spectrum of it on
Yeah.
display. And then so all of that protective patterning that we drive from our homes to the shala with is in full gear. I think
Mhm.
mine is anyways. And then we step into the space and there's um the flower, so the 8 limbs of yoga, if I remember right.
Mhm.
And um Or is it the yamas and niyamas?
It's all of it.
All of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So this like the highest values of one particular spiritual or life path displayed on the wall. And there's quiet, and there's people are respectful, but they're not, and they're kind, but they're not asking you anything about yourself. Like, don't show up like, oh, what do you do? You know, it's like,
yeah,
we're here to do
yeah.
something. There's breathing. There's the
Mhm,
certain level of intimacy. Um, you come with kindness on display. At times, you've had your child with you in the room, your
mhm,
children at different times, I would imagine.
mhm,
There's a
mhm.
generosity in be here if you want to be here and try it for a few weeks. Like all of those little things that are in your room are in such contrast to what's happening outside of that room. And by the way, it's like in a strip mall, you know,
Yeah,
it's like
next
little
to a donut shop and a Korean
laundromat.
restaurant and a hair salon.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
it's like this little pod of resistance.
yeah,
Nobody's like in there on their phone. I'm, oh, I'm assuming. I've never seen it.
yeah.
Um, no one's posting pictures of their yoga poses or, you know, those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And I feel like there's like when you were talking about it, I just heard the like resistance.
Yeah, I think that's resistance as a way of being, or our way of being as a form of resistance. Perhaps
and,
that's, you know, the most potent form of resistance that we have.
and small spaces and I'm, you know, just still at the same time also really glad that you're getting out there in a bigger way too beyond that, and
Yeah.
inviting people into those spaces. You said something in your article. Let me see if I can find it real quick. And I'm just referring to this because it was like knowing you for decades or more. I'm not
Mm.
sure. Probably started
Yeah,
talking a
something
decade
like
ago,
that.
but
Yeah.
we were just helping each other in the room before that. I was like, yes, like this is in the yoga journal, you know, the biggest, the most mainstream of all the yoga publications that are out there. Um, you're talking about the cultural appropriation, but you said something that I think is just bigger than that too, although that's a hot conversation. I've watched the dialogue around this topic become increasingly hostile and divisive. I find that, like so many other issues this day, the conversation lacks nuance.
Mhm.
It was like, it's not that one side is right or wrong. There's nothing in that article that said you're right or wrong. You held this line that was like right down the middle, holding both
Mhm.
perspectives. And the word like lacking the phrase lacking nuance.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on like how to bring more nuance, not just into the conversations that are happening online, or
Yeah.
but how we get from I'm right, you're wrong, this is the true culture, that's the appropriated version. Like, how do we
Mhm.
create a more nuanced relationship with our lives and with each other?
Honestly, the first thing, well, the first thing that came to mind is by doing the work that you both are doing, like sitting in circles. It sounds simple enough, but you know that it's not that simple. But there's something um, really powerful that happens when you acknowledge, when you sit in a circle and acknowledge that everybody in that circle has a viewpoint, and there's no, yeah, there is no right or wrong in that circle. It's just everybody's viewpoint, everybody's perspective, and we all have our own. And then the second thing that came to me is, you know, in terms of how to move in the direction of more nuance, I think it's to get offline, frankly. I think we spend way too much time online. I think we have created too much social cachet eh, online. It's like, yeah, it's really weird because, like you said, it's like the micro fame. You know, it's like the chase of the micro fame is what will drive us to to become increasingly more rigid and rigid about our positions because we don't want to say the wrong thing, or we want to say something really bad about the person that said the wrong thing. But if you actually just interact with people, no one's going, not no one, most people are not going around and being hostile to each other toward, maybe in LA street on when you're driving in LA, but you know,
When you're
you're like,
secondary vehicle. Yeah.
but you're in a little box, you know. It's like you have the illusion of separation in that. particular scenario. But if you're actually spending any time with people in person, I think it's you can't avoid the fact that things are more complex than you may want to believe, because you will have a friendship with somebody, even if it's casual, and then it might come out that they believe something totally different than what you believe about a specific issue. Are you going to still be able to be friends with that person? It's as simple as that. I think if we can actually move into more and more real in-person relationships, the understanding of nuance is inevitable.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that, I mean, living in Los Angeles, do you find that you can cultivate, I guess what's the question I'm asking is like, where do you, outside of the yoga room, I know you're doing it in the yoga room, which is one of the reasons probably some people keep coming, even though can be so hard to show up every day experience, that there's a little community there. What other spaces, like, how can we cultivate that community outside of a program,
Yeah.
outside of a,
Well, in that way, I think it is kind of like what I was saying earlier about having a little bit of structure. I think we do need containers, even if that container is like, knitting, or I like this kind of music, and you like, a mommy and me type of situation. That's like what because I'm a mom to young children, so that's often I find in my little community, like where people go to meet others. But it's really funny. I'm thinking right now back to my first experience in like a mommy and me group, which is like now, years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And in that experience, I didn't feel there was much room for nuance. It was like all these moms who wanted to like say the right thing because they just had their babies and they wanted to do it the right way. And, um, so it's tricky. I don't know. I think, yeah, I don't know. Maybe you just need to be that bold one. I remember in what happened to me in that group is that I just didn't go back. I felt like that was a group in which I couldn't say what I really thought, or I couldn't, so I just didn't go back. But I wonder if perhaps a more productive thing would have been to go back and compassionately just be honest.
mm-hmm. So the question I was asking was like, like hindsight's 2020,
Yeah.
obviously,
Yeah.
but in retrospect, what would honesty have looked like in that situation for you?
Just I'm trying to remember what the exact situation was that really put a bad taste in my mouth. Um, I think that I have a tendency, as much as vocal as I am, or as I can be in certain contexts, I also have a tendency to want to be a people pleaser. And I think in that situation, honesty would have been me putting myself out there in a way that, in which I recognize may have caused people to not like me as much,
Mm-hmm.
but that perhaps may have actually allowed more people to be more vulnerable with their authentic experience.
I'm always
The
like,
right. Oh, sorry.
let me say this, and then definitely, Miriam, I could step back a lot, so I will. I used to be afraid when people would come to our programs and be like, I don't feel like I can really say what I think right now. I used to be like, oh no, we're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm like, yes, thank you. You finally cracked it open for everybody. you know, like,
Right.
like if you felt, someone said this about my kids the other day, like if my 2-year-old, if my 2.5-year-old is like willing to express herself completely in front of me, it's probably a good sign,
Yeah. Yeah.
even if I don't like how she's expressing herself. But it's also like that with adults. Like if there's an environment where people can speak up about how they're not, and then someone has the
Mm-hmm.
courage to say,
Mm-hmm.
I can't be completely myself here.
Yeah.
And we as the
Right.
leaders, and I love that you called yourself the leader of the room, of the space, and I want to come back to that later, what that means for you. But if we have as leaders can embrace that it's like that's the secret ingredient to the next
Yeah. What you just
stage.
said reminded me. We just had a little day-long shala retreat, and in the opening circle, one of the questions the prompts that I offered was, I think, like, what is a gift that the practice has given to you? And just to give you a little context, since COVID, our community has almost entirely like reformulated itself. It's almost all people that don't know each other very well, whereas before we had these really like deep established relationships. And so part of this time together was like an opportunity to connect in that way. And so as we were going around the circle, one of the students, like, you know, said something about a gift that the practice that I had offered her, and then she said, but also like there's a lot that this practice has taken away from me, and
Hmm.
I just thought that was really so powerful. And then we did a whole another round of, well, what has the practice taken away from you? Because I think it's really really important to acknowledge. Um, so that, yeah, what you said just reminded me of that, because I think, yeah, one of the responsibilities we have as leaders is to make a room for all of it.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Oh, I can't wait. I wish I could ask you what people said the practice has taken away from them, but I won't.
Mostly time.
The
Yeah, mostly time. Time for all the other things.
the
Hopefully
it
less
kept
productive
when you were talking about presence before, I like when you were talking about like taking your presence out, and Adam was describing, like the LA streets. I could even get more graphic in terms of like fear of some of those walking down some of those LA streets. Um, I kept the word that kept, but it's thing that kept on coming up for me is like, but it's scary. It's scary being present to it all, and
Yeah.
the simplicity of like coming home to being present to breath and then to body and listening, and like the phrase that was like integrity that I hear you talking about is integrity of presence.
Hmm.
It's like taking an integrity of presence of like, okay, what is like that, when you use the word observation, like what is happening here, what are the nuances of what is happening here. And that your story about the mummy and me group is like, and now what do I do about it? It's like, what's my responsibility now? Now I'm present to it. And again, that intersectionality, which in your work, I just see it coming up. It's profound the way that you've talked about parenthood and motherhood. Um, there are people when you ran the retreat here in Ojai who I have seen pretty recently who will talk about it, like just
Oh, wow.
the capacity to take that integrity of presence and meet what's happening in yourself, in your life, in what's going on around you. And so, and even in that question of the circle that you just brought up, yeah, let's talk about what we're losing, let's go there.
Hmm.
Um, and I wonder, like, we've mentioned the polarities, in your world, and just one more thing that's striking me. Sorry, this is a bit of a monologue, but it is going somewhere. Is we were walking last time I saw you, we went for a walk, and you talked about, I'm not sure about yoga anymore, being a yoga teacher.
Hmm.
I'm not
Hmm.
sure. I'm not sure about it anymore with what's going on in the world, in myself. I'm just not sure. And we're coming back now, which feels like a surety, at least to me in this conversation, and feels like there's a kind of, I would describe it almost as like in the way that you're talking out in the boldness of fierceness of like, yes,
Hmm.
I'm going to stand
Hmm.
my ground here with
Hmm.
this integrity of presence. And I'm just interested in that journey,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
journey from doubt in meeting the world into yes, that's happened quite
Yeah.
recently.
It's been a really uh ripe and fertile journey for me the last year or so, because I think, yeah, I had seen you right when my son was born, and he's 15 months now. So yeah, about the last year or so, I feel like I've been having like what would very much look like a midlife crisis from the outside. in terms of my work. And it's tied to, uh, whether I feel my family is complete or not. It's tied to all that stuff. And as a woman, we have to take these realities into account, biological realities and stuff. So it's all part of it. But yeah, I have been feeling a lot of doubt, in terms of, yeah, is this what I want to be doing for the rest of my life? And the thing is, I don't know the answer to that question. Um, but the surety I think that you're sensing now is not really a surety, but um, it's an acceptance and an embracing of the fact that the work I'm doing and the community that we're creating, the practice that we're engaging with, is giving me an opportunity to get people together in real life, live in their bodies. And I think in this moment, we really, really, really need that. And the fact that I have the opportunity to do that is enough for me in this moment. And I am somebody who wants to know what life is going to look like for the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years. That's always been my temperament. And for me to not know and be sort of okay with it, even a little bit comfortable in the not knowing, is sort of radical. It's new for me, and I like it. And also, I think it's not being attached to wanting to teach yoga for the rest of my life has actually freed me up to be more vocal about things, because I don't really, if everything gets taken away from me for some reason, that's okay too.
It sounds like a relationship with identity somehow.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
Again, like, oh God, you're such an integrous person. I love you. The integrity of that, like, I think one of the things that I heard you and Adam talk about is that the social media construct creates, like, overemphasizes identity, like, this is my identity,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
this idea of stepping back, having distant, like, obviously we all have identities and people see us in particular
Yeah.
ways, but the healthiness of stepping back from that identity and the required not knowing, like, that
Yeah.
is in that space. And
Yeah.
and how does, in that new quality that you described, the not knowing, stepping back from the plan or the kind of secure vision, how is that changing the way you see things, or not?
How I see things more like generally,
Yeah,
or
just generally, like you mentioned, not knowing being a new
yeah.
kind of capacity. Like,
Oh
how is
yeah,
that changing
yeah.
the way you relate to things and interact with things, if it is?
I think it is. I think, yeah, I think it's more than anything, it's giving me freedom. And uh, it's funny. I've always been like a little bit rebellious, and my parents could definitely, affirm that. Uh, and so maybe this part of it is like coming back to sort of like bringing that like rebel spirit into my very sort of, traditional homemaker life that I'm living right now. Um, uh, or sort of just incorporating that rebellious spirit internally, where, yeah, I just feel more free. I feel like I can actually be in the present moment instead of trying to plan. Although I have to say, like, I have my planner tendencies are just never gonna go away. They're always a constant presence. I live with them. I'm learning to accept and love them, but I'm also learning that, they're just a part of me, and that I can really invest more in my relationships now, because I'm not so attached to who I think I am going to need to continue to be, or even I feel less of a grasping in relationships needing to always be the same, sort of just being who I am and understanding that relationships also will ebb and flow. Yeah, that's been a big learning for me the last couple of years. Also, my relationships have changed. Um, I don't know if you all experienced this when you became parents, but I had a lot of friends who were very close to me before I became a parent, and then sort of this restructuring of community and friend relationships once I became a parent, because I think that it's very difficult to live this new reality with other people who don't also live it. At least that's been my experience. And so just that restructuring has been really fascinating to be a part of. And it's taught me that, simple. Isn't this what we learn in yoga? Everything changes. Everything changes.
And as a teacher and leader, how does the not knowing intersect with that?
Gosh, everything I feel like I keep coming back to in this conversation. I think that not knowing just frees me up to be in the right now. And I think I've said that a few times over this conversation. It allows me to meet students where they are, and it also allows me to meet myself as a teacher where I am. Speaking to this particular moment in my life, I'm very stretched. I have two young children. I'm often late getting into the shala. I'm often a little harried or a little, unfocused, and giving myself the room to just let that be what it is in this moment. Uh, it's yeah, I think it's pretty profound, like, not to, as someone who has had a tendency towards perfectionism in the past, I think it's been pretty cool for me to just give myself the permission to not be perfect, because I'm not worried that, oh, if I don't show up on time and I'm not totally focused every single day, I'm going to lose these students and the shala will be taken away from me. Well, that may happen. Okay. It's, I think I'm just going to be who I am in this moment. And if it's working for people, it's working for people. And when it's not working for people, then other things will.
I want to I'm going to take the role here of the third, like the witness. I'm going to take that piece from you, Miriam. But when we went, just going back, tracking back to the conversation, part of our conversation about like speaking up, and we're talking about yoga and lineage, institutionalized culture or culture. And when you were talking, I thought, here is someone who is free from, has liberated herself from having to defend her position. Defend according to the rules.
Yeah.
And I felt like there was an opportunity even in there, like to bring forward a feeling of compassion, a more compassionate relationship with the whatever we were avenging in our Ashtanga Avengers group.
The orthodoxy.
Yeah, the orthodoxy. It's like,
yeah,
it like makes so much sense. I mean, we just look at our own lives and experiences and like, oh, we've got this cool thing happening, like all the students and a space, and we can show up and offer our
right.
gifts. And of course we would be afraid at some point of like losing that,
Yeah.
And now I think the three of us here, but we're talking about you can also stand in this truth that you have gifts to offer, and they will find their right context, and no one can take that away from you.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, it doesn't need the Ashtanga context. It doesn't need permission from anybody else via some orthodoxy or culture.
Yeah, and I also think that there's something, I think that there was a part of me in the past that wanted affirmation from the orthodoxy.
Yeah.
A validation. And honestly, it's been incredibly empowering, just to, not that I relish in anyone else's failures or what's been taken away from anybody else, but I think that our little shala is the last little shala standing in LA after COVID. And I think it's because of the depth and strength of the relationships that were cultivated there that we were allowed, that, you know, that we were able to survive. And even though the student community is now almost entirely different, those relationships that were strong at that time were the ones that carried us through and sort of allowed for this rebirth that we're experiencing now. And just being witness to that process of sort of an old community dying and yet creating the fertile ground for this new community to emerge. Just watching that has taught me a lot about cycles and and given me sort of this understanding that this one will also die. You know, this whatever I'm witnessing right now will also die. And then, you know, who knows what's next? So we'll see. Um, yeah, but being witness to this whole process has also liberated me from that desire, that the desire for validation that I felt before. Yeah.
And if you had been stuck defending an identity staked on that community or your success in that framework, that social framework, you might have been like, oh, everything's falling apart, I need to quit, you know, right? Like it would,
Oh yeah, and I had
there's
plenty
like
of
a
those moments
fragility in
too,
that.
actually. You know, I had plenty of those moments.
Yeah.
Oh, good, you're human. Oh, good.
Yeah.
And what kept you going? Like staying in the, but you didn't, you know, like that's the point, right? Like,
Other people. No, you know, people, my web, my community is what kept me going. The students, I've always, of course, there is, you know, I acknowledged earlier, I am the leader of this space. It's not like there's no hierarchy. It would be foolish to say that there's not a hierarchy. Um, but as much as possible, I try to sit physically and metaphorically speaking in circle with the students. You know, I try to lean on them as well for support. And I really did during COVID. I had called together sort of like several folks who were among my most committed, and you know, just getting on a very pragmatic level when it was time to like renew our lease. And it was during COVID. I was like, what do we do? Are we renewing this lease or not? And it was the other students that really helped me make that decision, and they're the ones that carried me. And so, you know, I'm here to do this work as long as it's resonating with people. And so that's what I really feel like you said, Adam, what I have to offer can take many forms, and I'm happy for it to take this form as long as it's resonating with whoever's receiving it.
do you know that you've just given a treatise on leadership resilience and how to
Oh, cool. Where's my
weather the
paycheck?
storms? I don't know. Where's ours? We're still waiting on it. I guess the paycheck is spiritual paycheck. That's because
Yeah.
it's obviously
I'll
coming
take
back
it.
to
I'll
you,
take that one.
and maybe one day that translates into the bank account paycheck. But I think, yeah, you know, in case it wasn't obvious, like to underline, you're not just talking about what it is to survive as a yoga teacher and thrive as a teacher and bringing together people, but also what it means to move through radical change and rely on relationships and
Yeah.
community support and allow that to carry you, and as a way of leading, you know, that's not just
Yeah.
that I think applies to anybody who's listening to this. And probably everybody who's listening to this, if they're over 25 years old or 30 years old or 20 years old, I'm not sure, at some point in our lives, it's like, who the heck doesn't want to quit whatever they're doing and
Yeah.
start something
Oh
completely
yeah.
new, you know, something over the rainbow.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
because it's hard, especially if we're committing,
Yeah.
if we're asking the deeper questions about what we're doing. It's gonna, at some point it's gonna feel hard,
Yeah.
and I think you show your story shows a way that's simple,
Mm.
and it's not 10 steps you can find on the internet and sign up for the funnel marketing and then get, you know, whatever you get from that. So it's about
Yeah.
relationships.
The,
Yeah.
The other thing I want to reflect is going back to the word intersectionality that you represent. Adam mentioned that you have your kids in, when you teach, you bring your and I've experienced that, you bring your kids in.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the intersectionality between East and West, India, America, that lives in you, between things that are seemingly separated, work and family. You know, where's what's the intersectionality of that, between, you know, spirituality and materiality. You know, that was a very material decision, renewing the lease, about money, and, you know, and I think that, yeah, I just want to reflect that place that you hold, and that gift that you bring, through who you are, not through necessarily, you know, just in being who you are in that intersectionality, is like bringing that perspective as you choose what to say and what to do. And this, you know, going back to that, the debate about cultural appropriation, you know, it's like I felt that it came from a place of knowing it, not an idea, just knowing it. I know this because this is my life. I know this place, and it doesn't. It is not. It is nuanced. I've experienced this, so I want to thank you for that gift, and for boldly putting it out there as who you are, putting yourself out there, with that presence that you bring.
Thank you. You know, it feels really special to have that mirrored for me. So thank you for that, and really thank you both for doing the work that you do and moving through the world in the ways that you do, being who you are. I've learned a lot from you, and something that, sort of a mantra that I really hold within myself, that I heard first from you guys, was it's all part of the program. I really, that lives with me.
Well, that's how lineage happens. We hear it from someone and say it again, and someone else hears it, and we attribute it upwards. So, thank you. Do you have any words of wisdom for the world out there? Any more? That was kind
Take
of
a
a
breath.
joke. What? Take a breath.
Take a breath.
Perfect. That was the perfect response to a silly question. Take a breath. Last thing, like, how can people find you? Like, what are you offering? How do people take, if they're inspired? As they're inspired by what they've heard, like, what's the best way to connect with you?
Well, if you want to practice some yoga, but you're not local to Los Angeles, you can find me on YouTube. I have lots of practice videos up there. You can always shoot me a question over email. You can find my email through the Yoga Shala West website. That's yogashalawest.com. If you're in LA, come practice with me. That's what I love the most. And or like find me at a park with my kids. That's it.
Well, no one's gonna want to go to a park in LA after how we've described the LA streets after this.
You can, like, find me on all the social, like the Shalas on Instagram. I'm on Facebook, but it's not really my jam. But if you want to, you can find me there.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to come practice. I haven't been practicing a lot, but if I was going to start again, when I practice yoga, I practice at Yoga Shala West. So I'm looking forward to that.
I love it. Yeah, I look forward to that too. And hopefully I can catch you guys somewhere in the wilderness sometime.
We're going to do it.
All right.
Thank you, Pranidhi.
You're welcome. Thank you both.
Thank you.